Have you ever noticed yourself waking up feeling just unusually warm for about half of the month? Or maybe you're already someone who tracks your temperature, and you've actually seen it jump up and down in this perfectly predictable monthly rhythm. From a very young age, we're basically taught that human body temperature is this static, unchanging rule. We think of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit as a permanent, solid baseline. But the reality, it's actually far more dynamic than that. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to explore the hidden biological machinery that actively manipulates human body temperature across the menstrual cycle, revealing a complex system that is constantly shifting right beneath the surface.
So, what's the core mystery we're unraveling today? It's the simple fact that the human body isn't some unmoving, static machine. The baseline temperature of a menstruating person actually shifts entirely on its own based on deeply ingrained biological rhythms, and it does this with absolutely remarkable precision. In fact, this internal shift happens so reliably and with such a predictable pattern that people can actually use it as a completely natural biological clock to understand exactly what is happening inside their reproductive system on any given day.
To really get into this, we first need to define the main metric we'll be using for our journey today, and that is basal body temperature, or BBT. Basal body temperature is defined as the absolute lowest body temperature your body attains during rest, which is, of course, usually when you're sleeping. To capture it accurately, it's typically estimated by taking a temperature measurement immediately after you wake up before you've done any physical activity whatsoever. And I mean it. The rules for taking it are incredibly strict for a very specific reason. Simply sitting up in bed, talking to your partner, or even flexing a muscle generates metabolic heat. That instant burst of everyday energy immediately corrupts the basal or baseline reading. You literally have to catch the body before it really wakes up. Monitoring this highly sensitive metric gives us a direct daily window into the profound hormonal changes happening inside.
Okay, so here's the roadmap for this explainer. We're breaking this down into 5 parts. First, we'll map out the menstrual cycle. Second, we'll look at the hormone tug-of-war. Third, we'll dive into exactly why body temperature rises. Fourth, we'll look at the pre-period temperature drop. And finally, we'll figure out how to tell the difference between a normal variation and a fever.
Part 1. Mapping the menstrual cycle, a chronological journey.
To really make sense of these temperature shifts, we first have to establish when they actually occur. Now, a standard model menstrual cycle is generally described as being 28 days long, though a typical healthy cycle can honestly range anywhere from 21 to 35 days. Fundamentally, this cycle is split right down the middle by the main event, ovulation. The first half is called the follicular phase. This starts on day 1 of menstruation and lasts until ovulation, roughly days 1 to 14. Think of this phase as the big buildup. The body is working hard to prepare an egg for release. Ovulation itself usually happens right around the midpoint of the cycle. And then, following the release of the egg, we enter the second half, which is the luteal phase, spanning roughly days 15 to 28. You can kind of think of the luteal phase as the aftermath, where the body is dealing with the consequences of that released egg. It is precisely this transition between the follicular buildup and the luteal aftermath that flips the switch on our internal thermostat.
Part 2. The hormone tug-of-war. Estrogen versus progesterone.
The real driving forces behind these temperature shifts are the rising and falling tides of your sex hormones. During the first half of the cycle, that follicular phase, estrogen is the star of the show. And estrogen actually acts as a cooling agent. It lowers the core body temperature by about 0.3 degrees Celsius. Think of estrogen as someone opening all the windows in a hot room. It actively inhibits cold-sensitive neuron activity and stimulates warm-sensitive neurons, essentially kickstarting the body's natural heat loss mechanisms to keep everything nice and cool. But right after ovulation, we see a dramatic shift. Progesterone takes over during the luteal phase, and progesterone is a powerful warming agent. The entire internal environment completely changes as these two hormones trade places in dominance.
Part 3. Why body temperature rises. The luteal phase shift.
Let's look at exactly how this hormone tug-of-war plays out. During the follicular phase in ovulation, things like luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone peak to trigger the release of the egg, while estrogen peaks right before ovulation. But after that egg is released, something truly mind-blowing happens. The ruptured follicle that just released the egg doesn't just heal and disappear. No, it literally transforms into a brand new temporary organ called the corpus luteum. Think about that. The body builds a temporary endocrine gland from scratch every single month just to pump out massive amounts of progesterone. Progesterone starts rising around day 12 and reaches this towering peak around day 25. And it's this incredible surge in progesterone generated by this brand new temporary organ that is directly responsible for turning up the heat.
So, how exactly does it pull this off? Well,
Progesterone is known to cross the blood-brain barrier and act directly on the hypothalamus. To put it simply, your hypothalamus is basically your body's HVAC thermostat. Progesterone doesn't just generate body heat on its own, it sneaks into the brain, walks right up to that thermostat and literally turns the dial up. It resets your thermoregulatory set point to a higher temperature. This forces your body to hoard heat, delaying normal cooling responses like sweating or flushing until that new, higher core temperature is reached. As for the evolutionary why behind all this, researchers suggest that this higher core temperature may improve the chances for a fertilized zygote to successfully implant in the uterine wall. The body is literally warming up the environment, creating a cozy little incubator in preparation for a potential pregnancy.
And the data we have on this is super specific. This progesterone-induced shift creates a sustained increase in your basal body temperature of between 0.2 and 0.7 degrees Celsius. That's roughly 0.4 to over 1 degree Fahrenheit. Now, I know what you're thinking. To the untrained eye, less than a degree Fahrenheit doesn't sound like a big deal at all. But when you plot it on a daily basal body temperature chart, it doesn't look like some subtle, random fluctuation. It looks like a clear, undeniable step right up a staircase. And this isn't just a brief passing spike. This elevated temperature is sustained for at least 72 hours and typically lasts the entire duration of the luteal phase. The presence of this distinct lower temperature phase followed by a higher temperature phase is what experts call a biphasic temperature pattern. It is a primary, highly visible indicator that ovulation has successfully occurred.
Part 4. The pre-period temperature drop. Resetting the thermostat.
Well, what goes up must naturally come down, right? Provided a pregnancy hasn't occurred, of course. If fertilization doesn't happen, the corpus luteum, that amazing temporary gland we talked about, begins to naturally degrade and shut down in a process called luteolysis. As it breaks down, those high progesterone levels rapidly plummet. You can kind of think of this sudden withdrawal of progesterone as someone just walking down into the basement and yanking the power cord on the furnace. Once that warming influence is completely gone, the hypothalamus recognizes the absence of the hormone, drops the set point back down to its normal level, and the body rapidly cools off. This sudden hormone withdrawal is the exact biological trigger for menstruation to begin, and it directly coincides with that rapid drop in basal body temperature, bringing the body right back to the cooler baseline of a brand new follicular phase.
Part 5. Normal variation versus fever. Knowing the difference.
Because we're spending all this time talking about elevated body temperatures, it's really vital to separate a normal luteal phase temperature rise from an actual fever. Let's say you wake up feeling unusually warm. You take your temperature and you see 99.1 degrees Fahrenheit. Without any context, you might panic, right? You might think you're coming down with a virus. But if you know you are currently in your luteal phase, you understand this isn't an invading pathogen at all. It's just your progesterone hard at work. A fever is an acute immune system response to a threat, and it typically spikes much higher. The luteal phase shift, however, is a completely natural, rhythmic set point change that caps around a 0.7 degrees Celsius increase. Recognizing this biphasic pattern isn't a sign of illness. Actually, it's the exact opposite. It's a direct reflection of a healthy, functioning endocrine system and a perfectly normal hormonal fluctuation.
Which really leaves us with this final thought. Medical researchers today are increasingly viewing the menstrual cycle not just as a reproductive process, but as a dynamic, monthly vital sign. Honestly, just like your heart rate or your blood pressure. By understanding how hormones like estrogen and progesterone continuously remodel your internal environment right down to your core temperature, you gain an incredibly powerful tool for understanding your own unique physiology. Think about it. If your body is meticulously adjusting its own thermostat every single month to prepare for new life, what other subtle daily rhythms are happening inside you, just waiting to be understood?